Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And summarizing everything that happened during the previous 24 hours, during the previous night, during the previous day of US time and nights of Ukrainian time, we can make a conclusion that Zelensky has become the enemy of the state #1 for the United States of America. Now let's discuss in details what exactly did happen. Trump calls Zelensky a dictator after Ukraine's leader accused him of living in disinformational space. Trump lives in a world of disinformation, CNN quotes Zelensky. The US president calls Zelensky a dictator, escalating a public war of words between the two leaders that began when Trump accused Ukraine of starting a war with Russia. Trump's accusation came just an hour after Zelensky accused him of spreading Russian disinformation. Speaking to media in Kyiv, Zelensky denied the US president's statements on Tuesday. Unfortunately, President Trump lives in the space of disinformation, stated by Zelensky. And that was probably the biggest mistake of him, because right after this situation, right after this interview, the Western politicals, very powerful people, began publishing a lot of interesting updates, making a lot of interesting statements. Trump is not going to tolerate Zelensky's escalating rhetoric that was stated by the White House. The area of endless destructive war with deaths and destruction on each side, which costs billions, which costs hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives, this area is over. US President Trump's national security advisor Mike Waltz. Another important statement that Zelensky cannot claim to represent the will of the people of Ukraine until he restores freedom of the press and stops canceling elections. This is how Elon Musk commented on the post by user X about elections being held in the US during the Civil War of 1861-65 and World War II. Another important statement was made by Vice President J.D. Vance. Elections in Ukraine are American policy. US Vice President J.D. Vance made this statement in an interview with the National Post. So we see that everybody in the United States of America is against Zelensky. And of course, Elon Musk couldn't remind people that Elon Musk accused Zelensky of killing Gonzalo Liro, American-Chilean journalist, that took place, as I remember, in 2024 or at the end of 2023, something like this. So this is the situation for Zelensky, but telling the truth, I don't see any panic from the Ukrainian side, and this tells us that most likely Zelensky has somebody behind him. If you remember, during the previous several videos, we've been talking a lot about some changes that took place in Zelensky security and people who were protecting him and organizations that were protecting him. And according to my understanding of the situation, in December of 2024, during the meeting between Donald Trump, Emmanuel Macron and Zelensky himself, there was a process of transferring of Zelensky from the CIA agents to the agents of some secret service of France. At least the updates and statements that were made by Macron during the previous days tell us exactly that something like this happened in December. For example, today Macron made another statement that we support Ukraine and we will take responsibility for ensuring peace and security in Europe. This is a fundamental interest of France and I am its guarantor. That was stated by Macron, and obviously he stands behind Zelensky. So very interesting political game. Of course, we're going to see what is going to be next, but one thing I can tell you for sure, that there are going to be no elections in Ukraine. There are no concerns that Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky could be ousted from the office after President Donald Trump said that Kyiv should hold elections. According to British newspaper The Telegraph, Newsweek has reached out of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine for comments via email. And another important thing that you know, that yesterday when Trump and when the negotiations in Saudi Arabia ended, we got a lot of statements from Zelensky. When Trump said that Zelensky has just 4% of support from his population, from people of Ukraine, probably a few hours later Zelensky stated that he had 57%. But as for this morning of Ukraine of 20th of February, we still haven't received anything from Zelensky after statements that were made by the politicals of the United States of America. Either Zelensky is afraid of something, or maybe Zelensky has already run away from Ukraine somewhere in the direction of France, London, or maybe in the direction of the Middle East, somewhere in the direction of United Arab Emirates. Anyway, we are waiting for another, let's say, part for the next episode of this war between the United States of America and Ukraine, and obviously this is going to be very interesting, and of course everybody is waiting for president elections in the territory of Ukraine. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and probably the most important updates are coming from the Bransk direction, more precisely from the Sumi region and Chernihiv area of Ukraine, along the border with the Russian regions of Bransk and Kursk. This morning, different Ukrainian sources and pro-Russian resources reported that Ukrainians concentrate their forces, or manage to concentrate, or are concentrating their forces along the border, and today we start receiving updates that Ukrainians are planning to begin another offensive operation in the direction of the city by the name of Bransk. So maybe the Ukrainians are going to do this, but telling the truth and taking a look, considering the situation in political sphere, considering the situation in relations between Zelensky and Western countries, obviously this attack might be something like a solution for all problems that Zelensky has right now. As for the Sumi direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russian sources published another video how they managed to discover the concentration of Ukrainian forces in the vicinity of the city of Sumi, and then the Russians began bombing and attacking the city of Sumi with a significant number of Iskander missiles. The Russians are saying that they managed to destroy another group of Ukrainian forces that the Ukrainians were planning to use exactly in the Bransk direction, but we see that most likely the plan were ruined. As for the Sumi direction, if you remember, yesterday the president of Russian Federation reported that the Russians crossed the border with Sumi and began advancing deep inside of the territory of this region, yet we haven't received anything that can confirm this. We haven't received any map. Mappers try to be very careful with this, because nobody knows for sure where exactly the Russians crossed the border. But once again, more and more sources are making conclusion that most likely the Russians are advancing in the direction of the settlement by the name of Novinka, and then further in the southern directions to the settlement of Basovka. Once again, nothing that can confirm this. As for geolocations and real episodes that have been taking place for the previous 7 days, I must say that most likely the Russians are planning to attack in the direction of Yunakivka from the southern direction, from the settlement of Plyokhova, because as for this area we got at least two geolocations where we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the temporary deployment points and the strongholds of the armored forces of Ukraine with the use of FAB 3000. This is the first episode that took place during the previous several days. As a result of this attack, a very powerful stronghold was destroyed. Another episode took place almost in the same area, several kilometers to the north. Another FAB 3000 arrived on the heads on the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine. So once again, when talking about geolocations, maybe the Russians are going to advance in this area with the purpose to cross the border with the Sumi region. When talking about different talks and rumors, the sources are saying that the Russians are going to attack in this area. So let's wait and see who is right and who is wrong. Anyway, as for the Sudi direction itself, according to information we have, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to answer the settlement of Lebedevka from the west, and currently the Russians are trying to dig in deeper. So the situation here is becoming very difficult for the Ukrainians, as you can see. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern Kupiansk direction. According to information we have, the settlement by the name of Topoli was completely captured and secured by the Russians. This information today was provided us by pro-Russian mappers. As for now, nobody else confirmed this information, so let's for additional hours, maybe today, Minister of Defense of Russian Federation or some other source will confirm this. If this information is correct, we see that the Russians are about to finish the preparation of the footholds to encircle the Ukrainians in the village of Kamenka. Now let's move further. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the city, in the area of the city of Chasiv Yar. Today the Russian sources published a video with a significant number of flags from the settlement of Grigorovka. The situation is very interesting because several months ago the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation already confirmed that the settlement of Grigorovka was completely captured and secured by the Russians, but now we see that maybe those updates were speculations, or maybe the Ukrainians later managed to counterattack and to force the Russians to fall back, because as you can see, according to our map, the settlement of Grigorovka was already colored in Russian favor. So today we're not changing anything, because we see that despite the fact that maybe the Ukrainians restore control of this territory, now we have no doubts that the village was captured completely. In this video we can see two Russian soldiers that were raising and waving the flags along the entire village. Based on this video we haven't colored anything, but we got another confirmation of Russian control over this territory. Now let's move further. As for the city of Toretsk, nothing. Another important portion updates are coming from the Vasylivka direction. Today, according to different mappers, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to enter the settlement of Tarasovka from the south. According to the coordinates and according to different corrections on different maps, the Russians control already up to 30% of the village, and the Russians continue advancing. This is very important village, because if Ukrainians lose control over this territory, the Russians will be able to advance further in the direction of the settlement of Alexandropol. And this is already something like a tightening of news around the Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Zarya, Stara Mykolaievka, so along the road N20. Now let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. We have a lot of very interesting updates. I'll remind you that during the previous days, the Russians managed to restore control over the settlement of Pishane, which allowed them to restore control over the main supply roads that go between Pishane and the settlement of Kotlina, and that allowed the Russians to restore their pressure, to restore their attacks along the railways towards the city of Pokrovsk itself. And today the Ukrainian sources published the video how they were after withdrawing and attacking the Russians. This is the video. This video was provided us by the 155th Mechanized Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, that was prepared by the way in France, and as a result of those attacks there were geolocated several episodes. One of them took place here. Based on this video we have adjusted this pocket, these stronghold positions along the railways, and this is another video that was published by the Ukrainian side. Once again in this video we can see Russian soldiers that were moving along the territory of this administration, mine administration, and based on this video we have adjusted this part. So if we compare the map between the dates, this is the situation, for example, by the end of the 19th of February, most of the territories that we colored today were, let's say, considered as a contested area, or the territories under complete Ukrainian control. As for now, we have proofs that confirm completely opposite information. Now let's move further. During the previous nights we haven't received almost anything from the area between the settlements of Ulakla and Constantinople. Probably there are very heavy clashes in both villages, but without any changes on the ground. Most likely either the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation, or the Russians managed to secure the territory completely, and maybe today the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation will confirm control over both villages. So let's move further. As for the Velika Novoselyovka direction, the Russians published the video of destroyed bridge in the vicinity of the settlement of Kamar. This is the bridge that the Russians destroyed several days ago, right before the beginning of another wave of Velika Novoselyovka offensive operation, and this bridge was very important because the Ukrainians were using the bridge to supply and support the forces along the line of combat contact. Furthermore, according to different sources, the Russians managed to improve their positions on the territory of this company's stronghold. Basically, the pro-Russian resources reported that this stronghold was completely captured by the Russians. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Zaporizhzhia direction. We haven't been receiving anything from this area probably for half a year or something like this, or even more. There were several updates about the some different escalations, provocations made by both sides, but today we got the first video that confirms Russian control, a Russian offensive operation. In this video we can see a huge convoy of Russian vehicles that were moving towards the settlement of Petykhatki, And in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were trying to slow down the Russians by attacking them and bombing them with artillery, with FPV drones. This exactly episode you can see in front of your screens took place exactly in this area. The Russians came to this line, landed infantry, and then vehicles were turned back. So as for changes on the ground, we haven't changed anything because the territories is already almost in Russian favor. But later, a few hours later, very reliable pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of most likely this or several more offensive operations, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Petykhatki. So the village was recaptured by the Russians. As for now, once again, we don't have geolocations from the village itself. We don't have, let's say, any statement from reliable source. So we are waiting for additional information. But maybe today the Minister of Defense will confirm this. If this information is correct, maybe the Russians are about to begin another offensive operation, but this time towards the city of Zaporizhzhia. Very interesting details and updates are coming from Odessa region. During the previous night, the Russians were bombing and attacking the city of Odessa. Mainly the Russians were trying to destroy the energy facilities, and as a result of those attacks, several energy facilities constructions were damaged and destroyed. There is no light in Odessa, and the Russians are saying, the Russian sources reported that the main purpose of this attack was to destroy energy facilities with the purpose to bring down Ukrainian drone production. That's currently there's a lot of factories, lots of industrial zones that Ukrainians use to produce drones that later they use, for example, in the Black Sea. Most likely the Russians managed to finish their goals. And that's it for today. For the short video, military summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.